Listen, creep, you're not fooling anyone. Turn around and leave before I call security.
I'm waiting for my realtor. I have an appointment to see the house across the street.
A house? You really expect me to believe you can afford a place here?
I don't need you to believe anything, ma'am.
She rolled down the window farther and flipped him off.
Then let me make this simple. Get out of my neighborhood. Right now.
I'm standing on a public street, and I'm not causing any trouble.
Several neighbors stopped to watch.
You people always think the rules don't apply to you.
The woman smiled like she had already won. She had no idea the man she was trying to run out knew exactly how powerful arrogance looks when it's about to be exposed. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. Malcolm Reddick pulled his modest silver rental car through the pristine gates of Belhaven Estates, watching the security guard's eyes flick from his face to the vehicle's interior before waving him through. The gatehouse attendant had taken his name, checked a list, and nodded with professional courtesy. Everything proper, everything by the book. The streets beyond the entrance stretched like scenes from a magazine. Enormous white stone houses sat behind manicured lawns that looked painted green. Oak trees lined the sidewalks in perfect spacing. Not a single blade of grass grew out of place. The silence felt heavy, expensive, and deliberate. Malcolm drove slowly down Magnolia Crest, checking addresses against the paper in his folder. 18 Magnolia Crest. The house he'd come to see for Nia and himself. A fresh start in a neighborhood with good schools and safe streets. A place where his 16-year-old daughter could heal from losing her mother and build something new. He parked across from number 18 and stepped out, stretching his legs after the drive from downtown. The afternoon sun felt warm on his shoulders. He wore dark jeans, a navy polo shirt, and clean sneakers. Respectable, unremarkable. The kind of clothes that shouldn't draw attention from anyone. But attention came anyway. Malcolm felt eyes on him immediately. Curtains shifted behind windows. A woman walking a small white dog slowed her pace, staring openly. A man washing his car in a nearby driveway stopped scrubbing and watched Malcolm pull a folder from the passenger seat. Malcolm ignored the stares. He'd lived with them his whole life. The difference was that today he had every right to be here. Carmen Bell, his realtor, had scheduled this appointment 3 days ago. He had pre-approval letters in his folder, bank statements, references, everything needed to buy a home worth more than most people saw in a lifetime. He leaned against the car and checked his phone. Carmen was running 10 minutes late. No problem. He'd wait. The house across the street drew his attention. 18 Magnolia Crest stood tall and proud, with cream-colored stone walls and dark green shutters. A circular driveway curved around a small fountain. Rose bushes lined the walkway, the kind of place where Nia could invite friends over without feeling embarrassed, where she could focus on her studies instead of worrying about sirens and break-ins. Malcolm opened his folder and reviewed the property details Carmen had prepared. 4 bedrooms, 3.5 baths, a study where he could work on cases from home, a backyard large enough for the garden his wife had always dreamed of planting. The memory of Sarah hit him like it always did, sharp and sudden. She would have loved this neighborhood, would have made friends with every neighbor within a week, would have convinced him to put in an offer the moment they walked through the front door. But Sarah was gone, and now it was just Malcolm and Nia trying to build a life that honored her memory while moving forward. A black luxury SUV turned onto Magnolia Crest, its engine purring with quiet power. Malcolm glanced up, expecting it to pass by like the other expensive cars he'd seen cruising the neighborhood. Instead, the vehicle slowed, then stopped. The SUV pulled up beside Malcolm's rental car, close enough that he could see the driver clearly. A woman in her early 40s sat behind the wheel, her blonde hair pulled back in a perfect ponytail. Designer sunglasses perched on her nose. Jewelry flashed at her wrists and throat. Everything about her screamed money and control. She rolled down her window and stared at Malcolm with unconcealed suspicion. "Excuse me," she said, her voice sharp and demanding. "Who are you, and who let you through the gate?" Malcolm straightened, keeping his expression neutral. "Good afternoon. I'm waiting for my realtor. We have an appointment to view a property." The woman's eyes narrowed behind her sunglasses. She looked Malcolm up and down, taking in his clothes, his rental car, his folder. Her mouth twisted into a frown. An appointment? What appointment? With which property? Her tone suggested she didn't believe a word he'd said. 18 Magnolia Crest. Carmen Bell is showing me the house at 3 o'clock. Malcolm kept his voice calm and polite, though something cold was starting to build in his chest. Carmen Bell? The woman laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I'm the HOA president for this neighborhood. I know every showing that happens here, and I don't recall authorizing any appointment for you." Malcolm felt the familiar weight of being judged before he'd even spoken, but this time felt different, more personal, more deliberately cruel. "I don't believe authorization was required," Malcolm said carefully. "The house is for sale. I'm a qualified buyer. The realtor arranged the showing through proper channels." The woman pulled off her sunglasses, revealing sharp blue eyes that burned with anger. "Proper channels? You think wandering around Bellhaven Estates is proper? You think standing on our streets with your little folder is appropriate?" Her voice had risen enough that more neighbors emerged from their houses. An elderly man stepped onto his porch. Two women across the street stopped their conversation to watch. A teenager on a bicycle slowed down to stare. Malcolm felt the neighborhood's attention focusing on him like a spotlight. Every instinct told him to diffuse the situation, to speak softly, to smile, and explain patiently until she understood the mistake she was making. But something in the woman's tone stopped him, the way she said "our streets," as if she owned every blade of grass, the way she looked at him as if he'd already committed some unforgivable crime simply by existing in her space. "Ma'am," Malcolm said, his voice still controlled but carrying a note of steel, "I have every right to be here. I have an appointment. I'm harming no one." The woman's face flushed red with rage. She leaned further out her window, close enough that Malcolm could smell her expensive perfume. "Right? You think you have rights here? You think you can just show up in Bellhaven and do whatever you want?" The crowd of neighbors had grown larger. Someone held up a phone, recording. Malcolm could feel their expectations pressing against him, waiting to see if he would back down, waiting to see if their neighborhood queen would put this outsider in his place. Malcolm looked directly into the woman's furious blue eyes and spoke with the same calm dignity he brought to his federal courtroom every day. "Yes, ma'am. I do think I have rights here. I think I have rights everywhere in this country." The woman's face twisted with pure fury. She raised her hand, extended her middle finger directly at Malcolm's face, and screamed loud enough for every neighbor to hear, "Get out of my neighborhood." The words hung in the air like a physical blow. Malcolm felt every neighbor's eyes on him, waiting to see how he would respond to being told to get out. The woman's middle finger remained raised, her face twisted with contempt that seemed to go deeper than simple annoyance. Malcolm took a slow breath, forcing his shoulders to relax. He had faced hostile courtrooms, angry defendants, and political pressure that could break careers. But this felt different, more personal, more deliberately designed to strip away his dignity in front of an audience that wanted to see him fail. "Ma'am," Malcolm said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline pumping through his system, "I don't want any trouble. I'm simply waiting for my realtor to arrive. Once she gets here, we'll view the property and be on our way." The woman lowered her middle finger, but kept her furious glare locked on his face. "Trouble? You think this is about trouble?" She laughed, a sharp sound that cut through the afternoon quiet. "This is about respect. This is about understanding where you belong and where you don't." Malcolm could hear murmurs from the growing crowd of neighbors. Fragments of conversation drifted toward him. Someone whispered about property value. Another voice mentioned security concerns. A third person wondered aloud who had approved his gate access. "I understand this is your neighborhood," Malcolm said carefully. "I'm not here to cause problems. I'm here to look at a house I might buy for my family." "Your family?" The woman's voice dripped with disbelief. "You think you can just move into Bellhaven? You think you can afford what we have here?" The insult landed exactly as she intended. Malcolm felt the familiar burn of being judged by his appearance, his car, his presence in a space where someone had decided he didn't belong. But he also felt something else building inside him, a quiet anger that had nothing to do with pride and everything to do with justice. "Yes, ma'am, I believe I can afford it." The woman's face flushed darker red. "Men like you always act so innocent, always pretending you don't know exactly what you're doing, always playing the victim when decent people ask reasonable questions." Malcolm noticed how she emphasized "men like you," as if those 3 words contained all the explanation anyone should need. He also noticed how several neighbors nodded along with her reasoning, as if her suspicion was not only justified, but necessary. His phone buzzed with a text from Carmen, running 10 minutes late. "Traffic. Be right there." Malcolm stepped sideways toward his rental car, pulling out his phone to photograph the house number. He wanted to send Carmen a picture so she could find the right address quickly when she arrived. "What are you doing?" The woman's voice turned sharp with alarm. "What are you photographing?" "Just the house number," Malcolm said, holding up his phone to show the screen. "For my realtor." "Put that phone down. You don't photograph anything in this neighborhood without permission." Malcolm lowered the phone but didn't put it away. "Ma'am, I'm standing on a public street. I have every right to—" The woman suddenly gunned her SUV's engine. The vehicle lurched forward with surprising violence, its front bumper catching Malcolm's left hip and slamming him sideways into the curb. His folder flew from his hands, papers scattering across the asphalt like white birds. Pain exploded through his shoulder as he hit the concrete, his phone skittering away from his grasp. Gasps rose from the watching neighbors. Someone screamed. Malcolm rolled onto his back, his hip throbbing and his shoulder sending sharp spikes of agony down his arm. Before he could even process what had happened, the woman was already shouting from her SUV window. "He jumped in front of my car! Did you all see that? He deliberately jumped in front of my car!" Malcolm struggled to sit up, his vision swimming slightly from the impact. The pain in his shoulder was getting worse, and he could feel something warm trickling down his arm where he'd scraped against the curb. "Call 911, he said to the crowd of neighbors, his voice strained but controlled. "Please call 911. The woman kept screaming from her SUV. "He attacked my vehicle. He was trying to get hit on purpose. This is exactly what people like him do. They create situations so they can sue innocent homeowners." Malcolm forced himself to remain calm, even as pain shot through his body and his papers blew across the street. He would not give her the satisfaction of seeing him lose control. He would not prove whatever point she was trying to make about men like him. 10 minutes later, a patrol car pulled onto Magnolia Crest, its lights flashing but sirens silent. Officer Trent Hollis stepped out, a stocky man in his early 40s with graying hair and tired eyes. "Tessa," he called to the woman in the SUV, his voice carrying the familiarity of old acquaintance. "What's going on here?" Then Officer Hollis looked down at Malcolm, still sitting on the curb with blood on his arm and his papers scattered around him. The officer's expression shifted immediately, his eyes narrowing as if Malcolm was already the problem he'd come to solve. Malcolm remained seated on the curb, his left shoulder throbbing where it had struck the concrete. Blood had soaked through his shirt sleeve, and he could feel gravel embedded in his palm. Around him, his scattered papers fluttered in the afternoon breeze, while neighbors clustered in small groups, whispering and pointing. Officer Hollis approached Tessa's SUV first, his body language relaxed and familiar. "Tessa, you okay? What happened here?" The woman leaned out her window, her face flushed, but her voice now trembling with what sounded like genuine distress. "Trent, thank God you're here. This man was trying to break into the Morrison property. When I asked him what he was doing, he became aggressive and threatening." Malcolm watched Officer Hollis nod sympathetically as Tessa continued her performance. She gestured toward the house with dramatic emphasis, her voice rising just enough for the gathered neighbors to hear every word. "He was taking pictures of people's homes, Trent." "Taking pictures?" When I told him this was private property, he started yelling at me. Then, when I tried to back away, he deliberately threw himself in front of my vehicle. Look at where he's sitting now, right where he landed after jumping into my path. Officer Hollis scribbled notes without questioning a single detail. His pen moved steadily across his notepad, as if Tessa's version was simply fact being recorded, rather than claims that needed verification. "I was so frightened," Tessa added, pressing her hand to her chest. "A strange man lurking around our homes, taking photographs, then becoming violent when confronted. This is exactly why we have security gates, Trent, to keep our families safe from people who don't belong here." The emphasis on "don't belong" made several neighbors nod in agreement. Malcolm noticed how quickly the crowd had accepted Tessa's narrative, how naturally they seemed to believe that his presence itself was suspicious. Officer Hollis finally approached Malcolm, his pen still poised over his notepad. "Sir, I need you to explain why you were causing alarm in this neighborhood." The phrasing struck Malcolm immediately. Not "what happened" or "tell me your side." Instead, Hollis had already assumed Malcolm was the source of alarm that needed explaining. "Officer," Malcolm said carefully, "I was not causing alarm. I had an appointment to view this property with a licensed realtor. While I waited for her arrival, this woman approached me, became hostile, and then struck me with her vehicle when I stepped aside to avoid confrontation." Officer Hollis looked unimpressed. "Do you have any documentation of this alleged appointment?" Malcolm gestured toward his scattered papers. "My purchase offer, financial pre-approval, and confirmation email are in that folder. They were in my hands when she hit me with her SUV." "He's lying," Tessa called from her vehicle. "Nobody scheduled any appointment. He was wandering around taking pictures of our homes. When I asked reasonable questions, he became belligerent and threatening." Officer Hollis glanced between them, but Malcolm could see the officer's skepticism was directed entirely at him. "Sir, Mrs. Kingsley is a respected member of this community. She's the HOA president. She has no reason to fabricate a story about—" "Malcolm, I'm so sorry I'm late." Carmen Bell's voice cut through the tension as she hurried up the sidewalk, her high heels clicking against the pavement. She carried a leather portfolio and a set of house keys, her face flushed from rushing. When she saw Malcolm sitting on the curb with blood on his shirt, her expression shifted to horror. "Oh my God, what happened? Malcolm, are you hurt?" Officer Hollis turned toward Carmen, his pen still ready. "Ma'am, are you familiar with this individual?" "Familiar?" Carmen's voice rose with incredulous confusion. "He's my client. Judge Malcolm Reddick is here to view the property at 18 Magnolia Crest. We scheduled this appointment 3 days ago. He's already submitted a purchase offer and financial documentation." The murmur from the watching neighbors grew louder. Malcolm noticed several people exchanging glances, their earlier certainty beginning to waver. Tessa's face had gone rigid, her knuckles white as she gripped her steering wheel. "You can verify everything," Carmen continued, pulling documents from her portfolio. "Here's his signed purchase agreement. Here's the pre-approval letter from his bank. Here's my email confirming today's showing time. Malcolm has been nothing but professional throughout this entire process." Officer Hollis examined the papers, his confident note-taking slowing considerably. The documents were legitimate, official, and impossible to dismiss. Carmen's real estate license was clearly visible on her business cards, and her professional credentials were beyond question. "Mrs. Kingsley said he was trespassing," Officer Hollis said, though his voice had lost some of its earlier conviction. "Trespassing?" Carmen's shock was genuine and visible. "He had every right to be here. More than a right. He's potentially buying this property. How could viewing a home he might purchase possibly be trespassing?" For the first time since Officer Hollis arrived, the crowd's attention shifted toward Tessa instead of Malcolm. Several neighbors were now studying her with curious expressions, as if seeing her claims in a new light. The woman who had seemed so obviously justified minutes earlier now appeared to have made a serious mistake. Malcolm used the moment to speak directly to Officer Hollis. "I need medical attention for my injuries, and I request that you preserve all evidence from this scene. That includes witness statements, the exact position of Mrs. Kingsley's vehicle, and any security camera footage from neighboring properties. Officer Hollis looked uncomfortable, clearly realizing that what had seemed like a simple removal of an unwanted person had become something more complicated. Carmen's documentation was legitimate. Malcolm's injuries were real, and now there were witnesses who had seen everything unfold. But before Officer Hollis could respond, Tessa pulled out her phone and dialed a number with sharp, angry movements. "Darius, it's Tessa Kingsley. I need you at Belhaven Estates immediately." Her voice was loud enough for everyone to hear, and Malcolm recognized the tone of someone accustomed to having problems solved through connections rather than truth. "I don't care what you're doing," Tessa continued into her phone, her eyes fixed on Malcolm with undisguised hostility. "Drop it and get here now. We have a situation that needs handling, and I mean real handling." She paused, listening, then spoke again with cold deliberation that chilled Malcolm more than her earlier rage. "Make sure this man never owns property here." The paramedics arrived within minutes, their white uniforms a stark contrast against the manicured lawns of Belhaven Estates. Malcolm sat still as the EMT checked his shoulder and examined the scrapes on his hip, answering questions about pain levels and range of motion while keeping one eye on Tessa's quiet conversation with Officer Hollis near her black SUV. "You're going to have some serious bruising," the paramedic said, gently probing Malcolm's shoulder blade. "Nothing appears broken, but you should get X-rays to be sure. That was quite an impact." Malcolm nodded, but his attention was divided. He could see Tessa gesturing emphatically at Officer Hollis, her voice low but her body language aggressive. The officer was taking notes again, and Malcolm noticed he had not once approached Tessa's vehicle to examine the front bumper for damage or paint transfer. No measurements of the scene, no photographs of vehicle positioning. Every investigative protocol Malcolm knew from years on the federal bench was being ignored. Carmen stood nearby, clutching her portfolio against her chest like armor. She had grown quieter since Tessa's phone call, her earlier confidence replaced by visible anxiety. The other neighbors who had gathered were beginning to drift back toward their homes, though several still watched from windows and doorways. "Dad?" Malcolm's head turned at the familiar voice. Nia was walking quickly up the sidewalk, her school backpack slung over one shoulder, and confusion written across her face. She had been expecting to meet him here for a tour of their potential new home, not to find him sitting injured on the curb surrounded by paramedics and police. "Dad, what happened?" Nia's voice carried the slight tremor that always appeared when she was scared but trying not to show it. She dropped her backpack and knelt beside him, her eyes taking in the blood on his shirt and the EMT's equipment scattered around him. "I'm okay, sweetheart," Malcolm said, reaching out to squeeze her hand. "There was an accident, a misunderstanding, but I'm fine." Nia looked around at the scene, the police car, the SUV, the watching neighbors, and Malcolm could see her putting pieces together with the sharp intelligence she had inherited from both her parents. "Someone did this to you?" Before Malcolm could answer, Tessa's voice cut across the space between them, loud enough to be clearly heard. "Officer Hollis, I think you understand why Belhaven has gates and standards," Tessa was saying, her designer sunglasses reflecting the afternoon sun as she gestured toward Malcolm and Nia. "We've worked very hard to maintain a certain quality of life here, a certain type of resident who understands our values." Nia's head snapped toward Tessa, her expression shifting from worry to something much sharper. "Are you talking about us?" "Nia," Malcolm said quietly, but she was already standing, her 16-year-old sense of justice blazing in her eyes. "You're the one who hit my father with your car." Tessa turned toward them, and Malcolm saw something cruel flicker across her face before she composed herself into a mask of wounded innocence. "Sweetie, your father created a very scary situation for everyone here. Sometimes accidents happen when people don't belong where they're standing." The paramedic looked up from his equipment, clearly uncomfortable with the tension crackling through the air. "Sir, I really recommend transport to the emergency room for those X-rays." But Malcolm was watching Nia, seeing the way her shoulders had gone rigid, the way her hands had clenched into fists. His daughter had lost her mother 18 months ago, She had endured whispers at school, pitying looks from teachers, and the quiet devastation of having her family cut in half. Now she was watching a stranger smirk while talking about how her father did not belong somewhere. Officer Hollis approached them, his notepad ready. "Sir, I'm going to need to see some identification." Malcolm reached slowly for his wallet, every movement careful and deliberate. He pulled out his driver's license and handed it over, watching as Hollis copied down the information. The officer made no mention of statements from other witnesses, no request for contact information from the paramedics who could document his injuries, no notation about the vehicle damage that would prove the impact occurred. "Officer," Carmen said hesitantly, "shouldn't you be taking photographs of the scene and speaking to everyone who saw what happened?" Hollis barely glanced at her. "Ma'am, I've got everything I need for my report." Carmen looked stricken, and she stepped closer to Malcolm. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I should have warned you. Tessa runs the HOA like she owns every property in here. She's blocked sales before when she decided buyers weren't suitable. She has connections with contractors, inspectors, even some city officials. People are afraid to cross her." Malcolm studied Carmen's face, seeing genuine regret mixed with fear. "Has she done this before?" "Not exactly like this," Carmen admitted, "but she's made life very difficult for people she doesn't want here. Legal challenges, inspection delays, permit problems. She knows how to use the system." The paramedic finished packing his equipment. "Sir, you really should get those X-rays. I can transport you now, or you can drive yourself to urgent care, but you shouldn't wait." Malcolm looked at Nia, who was still staring at Tessa with barely controlled anger. His daughter needed to see him handle this correctly, with dignity and strength, but she also needed to see him take care of himself. "I'll drive him," Nia said firmly. "I have my license." "Absolutely not," Malcolm replied. "Carmen, would you mind driving us to urgent care? I don't want Nia behind the wheel when she's upset." As they prepared to leave, Malcolm gathered his scattered papers while Nia helped him to his feet. The movement sent a sharp pain through his shoulder, but he kept his expression neutral. Around them, the remaining neighbors were beginning to disperse, their afternoon entertainment concluded. Tessa stood beside her SUV, watching them with satisfaction written across her features. As Malcolm limped toward Carmen's car, supported by his daughter, Tessa addressed the few neighbors still within earshot. "This is exactly why we protect our gates," she announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to having the last word. "When you let just anyone wander through here, these situations are inevitable." The urgent care waiting room smelled like disinfectant and anxiety. Malcolm sat in a plastic chair that squeaked every time he shifted his weight, trying to find a position that did not send lightning through his shoulder. Nia perched beside him, her school backpack clutched in her lap like armor, her eyes still bright with anger from the confrontation. "The X-ray tech said it would be about 20 minutes, she said, checking her phone. "I texted Riley to pick us up when we're done. Her mom said it's no problem." Malcolm nodded, grateful that his daughter had thought ahead. Carmen sat across from them, her laptop balanced on her knees, fingers flying across the keyboard with nervous energy. "I'm sending you copies of everything," Carmen said, not looking up from her screen. "The showing appointment confirmation, your pre-approval letter, the purchase offer, all the correspondence we've had about the property. If Tessa tries to claim you weren't supposed to be there, we have documentation going back 3 weeks." Malcolm's phone buzzed. The caller ID showed Detective Lisa Warren from the county sheriff's office. He answered carefully, aware that Nia was listening to every word. "Mr. Reddick, this is Detective Warren. I need to inform you that a complaint has been filed regarding an incident at Bellhaven Estates this afternoon. The complainant alleges that you engaged in threatening behavior toward a neighborhood resident." Malcolm kept his voice level. "I see. And what is the nature of these alleged threats?" "The complainant claims you became verbally aggressive when confronted about trespassing on private property. She states that you positioned yourself in front of her vehicle in a threatening manner." Malcolm felt Nia's hand grip his arm. "Detective Warren, I was struck by Ms. Kingsley's vehicle while standing legally on a public street. I have witnesses and medical documentation of my injuries. I would like to file my own complaint for assault with a vehicle." There was a pause. "Sir, Officer Hollis filed a preliminary report describing the incident as minor contact resulting from a misunderstanding. He noted that you appeared agitated during his investigation." Officer Hollis spoke with Ms. Kingsley for approximately 15 minutes and questioned me for less than 5. "Did his report mention that I was a scheduled buyer with documented permission to be there?" I'll need to review the full report, sir. Can you come in Monday morning to provide your statement?" Malcolm agreed to the appointment and ended the call. Carmen looked up from her laptop, her face pale. "Malcolm, I just got a message from Darius Vale. He's representing Tessa Kingsley." She turned the laptop screen toward him. "He's threatening to sue me and my brokerage if I proceed with your offer. He claims Tessa has evidence that you engaged in criminal trespass and intimidation." Malcolm read the email, noting the carefully worded legal threats and the implication that continuing the transaction would result in costly litigation for Carmen's small business. "He's also demanding that I turn over all communication records between us," Carmen continued. "He wants proof that you were actually invited to the property." "Which you have," Malcolm said. "Yes, but Malcolm," Carmen's voice dropped, "Darius Vale is not someone you want as an enemy. He represents half the wealthy families in this county. He has connections everywhere. He can make my business disappear with a few phone calls." Nia had been listening in silence, but now she spoke up. "This is insane. She hit you with her car, and somehow you're the one being investigated?" Malcolm's phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from an unknown number. "Preliminary incident report available for review. Officer T. Hollis, badge WA47. He opened the attachment and read Officer Hollis's summary with growing disgust. The report described minor vehicle contact during a neighborhood disturbance. It stated that Malcolm had been observed in an agitated state and had positioned himself near the complainant's vehicle. It made no mention of Tessa's verbal aggression, her admission that she struck him deliberately, or the fact that he was a legitimate buyer with permission to be there. "Dad," Nia said quietly, "maybe we should just find a different house. This is getting crazy." Malcolm looked at his daughter, seeing the fear behind her anger. She had already lost so much. Her mother, their old home, the life they had built together. Now she was watching her father being attacked by strangers who had decided he did not belong in their world. "Walking away might protect us tonight," Malcolm said carefully, "but it leaves the next family to face this alone tomorrow." "What do you mean?" Malcolm thought about Carmen's words, about Tessa's history of blocking sales and intimidating buyers she deemed unsuitable. He thought about Officer Hollis's biased report and Darius Vale's threatening letters. This was not one woman having a bad day. This was a system. "Your mom used to say that bullies count on good people being too tired to fight," Malcolm said. "They count on us deciding it's easier to find another neighborhood, another school, another job. They count on us believing that avoiding the problem is the same as solving it." The nurse called his name before Nia could respond. Malcolm stood slowly, feeling the stiffness in his hip, where Tessa's bumper had connected. "Mr. Reddick, we have your X-ray results." 20 minutes later, Malcolm sat in an examination room while a tired-looking doctor reviewed his chart. "No fractures, which is good news, but you have significant soft tissue damage to your hip and shoulder. The abrasions on your elbow will need to be kept clean and covered. I'm prescribing pain medication and recommending physical therapy if the stiffness persists." The doctor handed him a printed summary of his injuries and treatment. "You'll want to follow up with your primary care physician in a week. And, sir, given the mechanism of injury you described, you're fortunate it wasn't worse." Back in the waiting room, Malcolm looked at the medical report that documented every bruise, every torn piece of skin, every place where Tessa's SUV had left its mark on his body. "Now we document everything," he said. Malcolm's townhouse sat quiet in the darkness as he and Nia climbed the front steps, both moving more slowly than usual. The porch light cast long shadows across the medical papers in Malcolm's hand, and the manila folder Nia carried containing Carmen's printed emails. Inside, Nia dropped onto the living room couch, while Malcolm spread everything across the dining table. The house felt different now, smaller somehow, less like the safe haven it had been that morning. "I'm going to create a timeline," Malcolm said, pulling out a yellow legal pad. "Everything from the moment we entered Bellhaven until we left urgent care." He wrote the first entry. 2:15 p.m. Arrived at Gatehouse, security confirmed appointment with Carmen Bell. Nia watched him work, her phone silent in her lap. Usually she would be texting friends or scrolling through social media, but tonight she seemed as focused as he was on making sense of what had happened to them. "Can you help me with the photos?" Malcolm asked gently. Nia nodded and took his phone, scrolling through the pictures he had taken of his injuries. Her face tightened as she looked at the bruising on his hip, the scraped skin on his elbow, the red marks where Tessa's bumper had caught him. "Dad, this is really bad," she said quietly. "I know." "No, I mean—" She held up the phone, showing him a clear image of the darkening bruise across his hip. "This woman could have seriously hurt you. What if she had been going faster?" Malcolm looked at his daughter's face, seeing fear mixed with anger. Nia had already watched her mother waste away in a hospital bed. The thought of losing her father to someone else's reckless anger must have felt unbearable. "She wasn't going that fast," Malcolm said, though he knew that was not really the point. "She did it on purpose, Dad. She looked right at you and hit the gas." Malcolm wrote another entry. 2:32 p.m. Tessa Kingsley deliberately struck me with her SUV after I stepped aside. They worked in silence for nearly an hour, Malcolm building his timeline while Nia organized the photos and emails by timestamp. The medical report went into a separate folder, along with the pictures of his injuries. At 11:47 p.m., Malcolm's phone rang. Carmen's name appeared on the screen. "Malcolm, I'm sorry to call so late," Carmen said when he answered. Her voice sounded strained. "But you need to know what happened tonight." "What is it?" "Tessa sent an email to the entire Bellhaven residence list about 2 hours ago. She didn't use your name, but—" Carmen paused. "She warned everyone about unknown outside agitators who had been prowling the neighborhood and threatening residents. She said the HOA was working with local law enforcement to ensure community safety." Malcolm felt his jaw tighten. "She's poisoning the well?" "It gets worse. Darius contacted the seller directly. He told them that if they proceed with your purchase, the HOA will file disputes over every inspection, every permit, every piece of paperwork. He said they'll make the closing process so expensive and time-consuming that it could take years to complete." Nia looked up from the photos, sensing the conversation had taken a bad turn. "The seller is getting scared, Malcolm," Carmen continued. "They just want a clean, simple sale. Darius is promising them the exact opposite if they sell to you." Malcolm added another entry to his timeline. 11:47 p.m. Tessa launches neighborhood campaign, threatens seller through attorney. After ending the call with Carmen, Malcolm scrolled through his contacts until he found Priya Sloane's number. His attorney answered on the third ring, her voice alert despite the late hour. "Malcolm? Is everything all right? I need your help, Priya. Something happened today, and it's getting complicated fast." He explained everything: the house showing, Tessa's attack, Officer Hollis's biased report, and now the campaign to pressure the seller and poison his reputation in the community. "I want you to handle all communication from here forward," Malcolm said. "I can't let them twist this into a story about a judge using his position to intimidate private citizens." Priya was quiet for a moment. "Smart move. You know they're going to try exactly that, right? The moment they figure out who you are, they'll flip the script. Suddenly, you'll be the powerful government official bullying an innocent homeowner." "I know. Malcolm, these people sound dangerous. Rich, connected, and desperate to protect their territory. They're not going to stop with threatening the seller. They'll come after your reputation next. They'll try to make you look like the aggressor, the outsider, the threat to their peaceful community." Malcolm looked at Nia, who was watching him with worried eyes. "Let them try," he said. After hanging up with Priya, Malcolm returned to his timeline while Nia finished organizing the evidence. The dining table looked like a war room now. Documents arranged in careful piles, photos sorted by timestamp, contact information for witnesses written on index cards. "Dad," Nia said suddenly, looking at her phone, "you need to see this." She handed him her device, showing a social media post from someone named Bellhaven Watch. It was a short video clip, clearly edited and taken from a distance. It showed Malcolm on the curb, gesturing toward Tessa's SUV while neighbors gathered around. The caption read, "Dangerous situation. Unknown man threatens residents on Magnolia Crest. Thank God our HOA president was there to protect us. Bellhaven safety. Protect our neighborhood." Malcolm stared at the screen, watching himself be transformed from victim to villain with a few strategic cuts and a lying caption. Sunday morning light filtered through the kitchen blinds as Nia sat hunched over her phone at the breakfast table. Malcolm watched her scroll through social media feeds, her face growing paler with each swipe. "It's spreading, Dad," she said without looking up. "The video has been shared 43 times just on this platform. People are calling you everything from a thug to a con artist trying to scam his way into a nice neighborhood." Malcolm poured coffee into 2 mugs, his movements deliberate and calm despite the anger building in his chest. He set 1 cup beside Nia's elbow and kept the other for himself. 24 hours ago, nobody in Bellhaven knew my name," he said. "Now I'm supposedly the neighborhood boogeyman." His phone rang before Nia could respond. The caller ID showed a local number he didn't recognize. "Judge Reddick, this is Elena Marquez from the City Tribune. I'd like to speak with you about what happened yesterday at Bellhaven Estates." Malcolm tensed. "How did you get this number?" "I'm an investigative journalist, and I've been tracking incidents connected to that neighborhood for 3 years. What happened to you isn't an isolated event, Judge. May I ask, are you planning to pursue this legally?" "I can't discuss any potential legal action with the media. I understand, but I think you should know that multiple families have reported similar treatment from Tessa Kingsley and the Bellhaven HOA. Harassment, intimidation, suspicious delays in their purchase contracts. The pattern is clear, but I've never been able to get enough people willing to go on record." Malcolm walked to the window, looking out at his current neighborhood. Modest townhouses where people minded their own business and didn't form committees to decide who belonged. What kind of pattern are we talking about? Buyers who don't fit Bellhaven's image suddenly face HOA obstacles that seem designed to make them withdraw their offers. Contractors get mysteriously removed from approved vendor lists after working with the wrong clients. Security footage disappears when it might contradict the official story. Nia looked up from her phone, watching her father's expression change. "I can't publish anything without solid proof," Elena continued, "but if you're willing to let me document what happened to you, it might encourage other victims to speak up. Your position as a federal judge gives this story credibility that previous complaints lacked. I need to think about this, and I won't meet without my attorney present." "Of course, Judge Reddick. These people have been operating with impunity for years because they target individuals who can't fight back effectively. You might be different." After ending the call, Malcolm explained Elena's offer to Nia, who had stopped scrolling and was listening intently. "Do you think she's right?" Nia asked. "That they've done this to other people? It would explain why Tessa was so confident yesterday. If this is standard operating procedure for her, she probably expected me to disappear quietly rather than make waves. But you're not going to disappear." "No, I'm not." That afternoon, Malcolm and Priya met Elena at a small coffee shop 3 blocks from the federal courthouse. Elena had chosen the location carefully, close enough to Malcolm's workplace to be convenient, but far enough from Bellhaven's influence network to ensure privacy. Elena spread a manila folder across the small table between them, revealing a collection of documents, printed emails, and handwritten notes. "This is 3 years of work," she said, "starting with the Martinez family in 2021. She pulled out a photograph of a young Latino couple standing beside a "sold" sign. Both teachers, stellar credit, pre-approved for a mortgage well above the asking price. They put an offer on 22 Oak Ridge Drive in Bellhaven. Within a week, They were getting surprise home inspection, HOA compliance violations for issues that didn't exist, and legal threats about everything from their landscaping plans to their choice of moving company. Priya examined the documents. These violations are ridiculous. Unapproved mailbox design before they even moved in? The sellers got nervous about the delays and withdrew from the contract. Elena continued. The house sold 2 months later to Tessa's college roommate for $30,000 less than the Martinez offer. She pulled out another file. The Johnson family, 2022. He's an Army veteran, she's a nurse practitioner. Same pattern. Sudden HOA obstacles, mysterious permit delays, and a social media whisper campaign about problematic buyers who might not maintain community standards. Malcolm felt his anger crystallizing into something sharper and more focused. The Williams family, early 2023, Elena said, showing them a third set of documents. Black business owners with excellent credit who found out after their contract fell through that Tessa's brother-in-law had submitted a competing offer the same day theirs was rejected. How is this legal? Nia had insisted on coming, and Malcolm had agreed after Elena assured them the meeting would be educational, not just strategic. It's not, Priya said grimly, but it's designed to look like legitimate HOA enforcement and normal market competition. Each individual incident could be explained away as coincidence or proper community management. Elena nodded. That's exactly the problem. Every family I interviewed had the same story, but they all thought they were the only ones. Tessa and her circle have perfected a system that isolates their targets and makes them feel like the problem is personal rather than systematic. She pulled out one final document, a thick folder marked HOA Bylaws and Covenants. Here's the really ugly part. Tessa's family helped write Bellhaven's current HOA rules when the development was built in 2018. Her father was the primary investor, and her mother served on the original Architectural Review Board. Malcolm opened the folder, scanning dense legal language about community character preservation and aesthetic harmony standards. These rules give the HOA nearly unlimited power to reject buyers, contractors, modifications, and even guests based on subjective criteria, Elena explained. Everything is phrased to sound like quality control, but the actual effect is to give Tessa veto power over who gets to live there. Priya whistled softly. This is sophisticated discrimination. They've built legal-sounding cover for what amounts to a neighborhood screening system. Judge Reddick, Elena said, leaning forward intently, you may be the first person they've attacked who has the resources, the legal knowledge, and the institutional credibility to survive their whole machine. Sunday evening settled over Priya's law office like a heavy blanket. The building was nearly empty, but the fluorescent lights in Conference Room B hummed steadily above stacks of Elena's research. Malcolm sat across from Priya's desk, methodically reviewing photographs of rejection letters, HOA violation notices, and social media screenshots. His shoulder ached from yesterday's collision, but the deeper pain came from understanding how calculated Tessa's attack had been. Look at this pattern, Malcolm said, holding up 3 different files. Every rejected family received their first HOA violation within 72 hours of submitting an offer. Every single one. Priya typed rapidly, drafting preservation letters on her laptop. We need to lock down evidence before it disappears. HOA meeting minutes, email communications, security footage from the gate and surrounding properties. What about the doorbell cameras Elena mentioned? Those too. I'm sending preservation notices to every homeowner on Magnolia Crest and the adjacent streets. If they delete anything after receiving legal notice, it becomes destruction of evidence. Malcolm rubbed his temples. Through the conference room's glass wall, he could see Nia in the lobby, hunched over her phone. Her shoulders shook slightly. She's reading comments about the video, Malcolm said quietly. Priya glanced up from her screen. Kids at school? Her chemistry lab partner texted asking if her dad was the one starting trouble in Bellhaven. Another friend shared the edited clip with a laughing emoji. Malcolm's jaw tightened. She wanted a fresh start. Now she's defending me to teenagers who think they know what happened. Malcolm, we can settle this quietly if you want. Tessa would probably pay substantial money to make this disappear, especially once she learns who you are. And then what? She goes back to terrorizing the next family? Malcolm shook his head. Elena showed us 3 years of victims. How many more before someone stops her? Priya saved her document and looked at him seriously. Fighting this publicly means Nia gets dragged through more scrutiny. The defense will paint you as an angry judge using your position for personal revenge. They'll question every ruling you've made, every case where race might have been a factor. Malcolm was quiet for a long moment, watching his daughter through the glass. What does Nia think? Ask her yourself. Malcolm walked to the lobby, where Nia quickly wiped her eyes and tried to look composed. Dad, I'm fine, just stupid social media stuff. He sat beside her on the leather couch. Priya thinks we could settle this without a big fight. Take some money, get an apology, move somewhere else. Nia stared at her phone screen where the edited video showed Malcolm appearing to step toward Tessa's SUV aggressively. The comments were brutal. Do you want to settle? She asked. I want you to be okay, but do you want to let her win? Malcolm considered the question. No, I don't. Nia nodded slowly. Then don't. She doesn't get to decide where we live, and she doesn't get to hit you with her car and then lie about it. Her voice grew steadier. If we run away, she'll do this to someone else's family, someone who can't fight back. It's going to get worse before it gets better. I know. Nia met his eyes. But I saw how she looked at you yesterday. Like you were nothing. Like we were nothing. She straightened her shoulders. I don't want her to be right. Meanwhile, across town in Belhaven Estates, Tessa paced the marble foyer of her sprawling colonial home. Darius Vale sat at her kitchen island, reviewing legal documents, while City Councilman Grant Pell nursed a scotch and looked increasingly uncomfortable. This is getting messy, Tessa, Grant said, loosening his tie. Hitting someone with a car creates liability issues I can't protect you from politically. It was barely a tap, Tessa snapped. He jumped in front of my vehicle trying to create a scene. That's not what the paramedic report says. Darius slid a paper across the granite countertop. Bruised hip, strained shoulder, documented lacerations. This isn't going away with intimidation. Grant stood and walked to the window overlooking Belhaven's pristine streets. My donors are already asking questions. If this becomes a discrimination story in the media, then we control the story, Tessa interrupted. We make him the aggressor before he can play victim. She turned to Darius. File the restraining request tomorrow morning. Paint him as unstable, potentially violent. Make it about my safety. Tessa, he's a federal judge. I don't care if he's the Pope. He threatened me in my own neighborhood, and I have witnesses who'll say so. Darius sighed and made notes. I'll draft the paperwork, but this strategy has risks. If he has good legal representation, he's some small-town nobody who got lucky on the bench, Tessa said dismissively. By the time his lawyer figures out how to respond, we'll have framed the narrative. Grant finished his drink and headed toward the door. I can't be associated with this if it goes public, Tessa. My political career won't survive being connected to a discrimination scandal. Your political career exists because my family funded it, Tessa replied coldly. Don't forget that. After Grant left, Darius gathered his papers. What about Officer Hollis? His report is thin. Hollis knows which side his bread is buttered on. He won't change his story. Back at the police station, Officer Trent Hollis sat at his desk, staring at his computer screen. The incident report cursor blinked in the middle of a paragraph describing Malcolm as agitated and confrontational. His partner, Officer Davies, leaned over his shoulder. You finishing the Belhaven thing? Yeah. Simple incident report. I heard the guy was pretty banged up for a minor contact collision. Hollis shrugged. Sometimes people exaggerate injuries for lawsuits. You know how it is. Davies frowned. Did you get statements from all the witnesses? Got what I needed. Hollis saved the document without changes. Mrs. Kingsley felt threatened. The guy was acting suspicious. Case closed. What about the realtor who confirmed his appointment? She wasn't there when the confrontation started. Hollis printed the report and signed it. My account is accurate enough. Monday morning, Priya's phone rang at 7:30 a.m. The court clerk's office had received an emergency restraining order request from Darius Vale on behalf of Tessa Kingsley. Priya read the filing with growing disgust. Tessa claimed Malcolm had aggressively approached her vehicle, made implicit threats about her neighborhood, and used his position to intimidate a private citizen. The request sought to prohibit Malcolm from entering Belhaven Estates or contacting Tessa directly. Priya immediately called Malcolm. "They are trying to make you defend yourself from the crime done to you," she said, without preamble. Malcolm was quiet for a moment. "How fast can we respond? I'll have our counterfiling ready by noon. But Malcolm, this changes everything. They're not just trying to cover up what happened. They're trying to flip the entire script. Then we better make sure our evidence tells the real story." Monday morning brought gray clouds over Belhaven Estates, matching Carmen's nervous mood as she parked outside Theo Larkin's house. She had spent Sunday night remembering which neighbors had doorbell cameras facing the street where Malcolm was struck. Theo answered the door in pajamas and a bathrobe, coffee mug in hand. His eyes darted past Carmen to check if anyone else was watching. "Carmen, what are you doing here so early?" "Theo, I need to ask you about Saturday afternoon. You were home when that incident happened at 18 Magnolia Crest, right?" Theo's face tightened. "Look, I don't want to get involved in whatever drama Tessa's stirring up now. This isn't drama. A man was hurt, badly, and I think your camera might have recorded what really happened." Theo stepped back from the doorway. "I can't get mixed up in this, Carmen. You know how Tessa is when people cross her." Carmen pushed gently forward. "Theo, you saw it happen, didn't you? You saw her hit him with the SUV. Theo glanced around nervously. "I was watching from the window when they started arguing, but I'm not testifying against Tessa Kingsley. She controls the HOA board. She could make my life hell. She already made an innocent man's life hell. He had every right to be there, Theo. I brought him to see the house. He submitted a real offer." Theo wavered. Carmen could see the conflict in his eyes. "Just check the camera footage," Carmen pressed. "That's all I'm asking. Look at what your camera recorded and tell me what you see." After a long pause, Theo sighed. "Fine, but if there's nothing useful, you drop this, okay?" They went inside to Theo's home security system. He pulled up Saturday's footage on his tablet, scrolling to the right timestamp. The doorbell camera had a clear angle across the street. The video showed Malcolm standing calmly near the curb, folder in hand. Tessa's black SUV pulled alongside him aggressively. Even without audio, her body language looked hostile as she leaned out the window. Then came the crucial moment. Malcolm stepped aside, clearly trying to avoid confrontation. He moved toward the house number to take a photo. That's when Tessa's SUV lurched forward, striking Malcolm and sending him sprawling against the curb. "Jesus," Theo whispered. "She really hit him on purpose. Can you send me this file?" Theo hesitated again. "Carmen, if Tessa finds out I gave you this, she won't find out from me. But this man deserves justice." Reluctantly, Theo emailed the footage to Carmen's phone. Carmen immediately called Priya from her car. "I have video evidence, clear footage of the entire incident. Where are you?" "Leaving Belhaven. Can I bring it to your office?" "Come now." By midday, Priya's office felt electric with possibility. Malcolm sat forward in his chair as they watched the doorbell footage on Priya's laptop. Elena took notes while the video played a third time. The evidence was devastating to Tessa's story. Malcolm appeared calm and non-threatening throughout. When he moved away from Tessa's window, she accelerated deliberately into him. "This changes everything," Malcolm said quietly. For the first time since Saturday, real hope lifted in his voice. Elena nodded. "Combined with your medical records and Carmen's testimony about the appointment, this footage destroys their entire narrative." Priya was already drafting preservation demands on her computer. "I'm filing formal requests for all security footage, gate logs, police body camera recordings, and HOA communications. They can't claim this was an accident anymore." Malcolm watched the clip again, seeing his own dignity preserved on camera even as Tessa struck him down. "How quickly can we move?" I'll have these demands filed by close of business today, Priya said. And Elena, when do you want to publish? Elena smiled grimly. Once we confirm they can't destroy any more evidence, this footage, plus the discrimination pattern I've been documenting, could finally bring down their whole operation. That afternoon, Darius Vale received Priya's evidence preservation demands with growing panic. He immediately called Tessa. There might be video footage of Saturday's incident, he said without preamble. What kind of footage? Doorbell camera from across the street. If it shows what I think it shows, we're in serious trouble. Tessa's voice turned icy. Handle it. Tessa, I can't make evidence disappear. That's obstruction of justice. Then we better hope there's no evidence to disappear. After hanging up, Tessa called Theo Larkin directly. Theo, this is Tessa Kingsley. I understand you might have security footage from Saturday afternoon. How did you know about that? Bellhaven is a close community. We look out for each other. Now, I hope you understand that involving yourself in this situation could be very complicated for you. Theo's voice shook. What do you mean? I mean, your HOA dues assessment is coming up for review. Your landscaping violations have been piling up. Your guest parking habits have been noted. It would be unfortunate if all those issues became enforcement priorities. The line went silent. Do we understand each other, Theo? Yes, ma'am. Tessa then called the HOA security supervisor, her voice sharp with authority. I need to know about any camera malfunctions from this weekend. Sometimes files get corrupted, don't they? That night, Theo's message arrived in Carmen's phone. I'm sorry. The file is gone. I can't get involved. Monday night settled over Malcolm's townhouse like a heavy blanket. Rain drummed against the kitchen window while he sat at the small dining table, staring at his phone screen. Theo's message glowed in the dim light. I'm sorry. The file is gone. I can't get involved. Nia padded into the kitchen in her pajamas, drawn by the sound of her father's frustrated sigh. She pulled out the chair beside him and noticed the defeated slump of his shoulders. Dad? What's wrong? Malcolm showed her the message. The video footage is gone. Theo claims he deleted it by accident. Nia's face fell. By accident? No accident about it. Malcolm's jaw tightened. Someone got to him. Before Nia could respond, Malcolm's phone buzzed with another message from Priya. HOA security reports system malfunction during collision timeframe. All footage lost. Malcolm read it aloud, his voice flat with disbelief. They made it all disappear? Nia asked. Every piece they knew about. The next morning brought worse news. Darius had produced a witness, Marla Voss, a Bellhaven resident who claimed she saw the entire incident from her garden. According to her statement, Malcolm had shouted threats at Tessa before stepping in front of her vehicle. She's lying, Nia said when Priya called with the update. Of course she's lying, Malcolm replied, but proving that takes time. We may not have. By Wednesday, the situation had deteriorated completely. Tessa had discovered Malcolm's identity as a federal judge, and instead of backing down, she weaponized the information. She filed an ethics complaint with the Judicial Conduct Board, claiming Malcolm was using his federal position to intimidate private citizens. The complaint painted a picture of an out-of-control judge who threatened neighborhood residents, then tried to silence them with his authority. Social media buzzed with edited clips and speculation about judicial abuse of power. Elena called Wednesday evening with grim news. The ethics complaint is spreading fast. Local political blogs are picking it up. Grant Pell gave an interview about accountability for all public officials. Malcolm sat in his living room, watching Nia pretend to do homework while secretly monitoring her phone for cruel comments from classmates. Dad, she said finally, closing her textbook, maybe we should just let the house go. He looked at her tired face and felt his heart break a little. Nia, every day this gets worse. Every step hurts more than the last one. My friends are asking if you really threatened that woman. Teachers are looking at me funny. Maybe Bellhaven isn't worth this. Malcolm studied his daughter's expression. She was 16, still grieving her mother, and now watching her father dragged through public humiliation. The cost felt enormous. You're right, he said quietly. The pain is real, and it's getting worse. Nia's shoulders relaxed slightly. But evidence doesn't just disappear unless someone fears what it proves, Malcolm continued. He stood and walked to his desk, unlocking the bottom drawer. From inside, he removed a small flash drive. "What's that?" Nia asked. Malcolm held up the drive, his expression shifting from defeat to determination. He picked up his phone and dialed Priya's number. "They deleted the footage they knew about," he said when she answered, "not the footage they missed." Tuesday morning light streamed through the tall windows of Priya's conference room as Malcolm placed the small flash drive on the polished table. Carmen sat nervously across from him, still shaken by Theo's sudden reversal. Elena had her notebook ready, pen poised but skeptical after yesterday's devastating losses. "Before we get excited about anything," Priya said, "let me be clear. If this evidence isn't rock solid, it could hurt us worse than having nothing." Malcolm nodded. "I understand, but I've been documenting from the moment I decided to look at that house." He plugged the drive into Priya's laptop. The first file showed Malcolm's rental car dashboard on Saturday afternoon, the camera facing forward toward Magnolia Crest. The timestamp read 2:47 p.m. "This starts when I parked," Malcolm explained. "The audio keeps recording even when the car is off." They listened to Malcolm's footsteps on gravel, then the sound of a heavy engine approaching. Tessa's voice came through clearly, sharp and angry. "Who are you? Who let you in here?" Malcolm's calm response followed. "I have an appointment to view this property. I don't care what you think you have. You need to get out of my neighborhood. Now." Carmen winced at the venom in Tessa's tone. Elena scribbled notes, marking timestamps. The audio continued through the entire confrontation. They heard Tessa's escalating threats, her obscene gesture accompaniment, and Malcolm's repeated attempts to de-escalate. Then came the critical moment, the sound of Malcolm's footsteps moving away from the vehicle. "I'm stepping aside," his voice said clearly on the recording. "I'll wait for my realtor." 3 seconds later came the engine revving and the sickening thud of impact. "Jesus," Carmen whispered. The recording captured Malcolm's grunt of pain, papers scattering, and Tessa immediately screaming, "He jumped in front of my car! You all saw it!" Priya paused the playback. "This is good, but we need more than audio." Malcolm opened another file. "My phone has automatic cloud backup for photos. Everything uploads with GPS coordinates and timestamps." The photos showed Malcolm's view of 18 Magnolia Crest at 2:45 p.m., then a selfie he'd taken to send Nia, showing the house number behind him at 2:46. The next photo, taken at 3:12 p.m., showed his torn sleeve and scraped elbow from the urgent care clinic. "The metadata proves I was where I said I was when I said I was there," Malcolm explained. Carmen leaned forward. "There's something else. When Tessa called her lawyer, I was on speakerphone with you, Malcolm. My call log proves the exact time, and I heard her say, 'Make sure this man never owns property here.'" Elena looked up from her notes. "Can your phone company verify that?" "Already requested the records," Carmen said. "My carrier keeps logs of all calls, including duration and connection quality." Priya began assembling the evidence into a timeline on her whiteboard. "So, we have audio of the threats, photos proving Malcolm's location, call logs proving the conspiracy to block the sale." Elena's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and answered. Elena Marquez. Malcolm watched her expression change from professional interest to complete shock. "Yes, I'll hold." She covered the phone. "This is Isaac Boone. He's a delivery driver. Says he saw my article request for witnesses and has footage from his van." 5 minutes later, Isaac arrived at Priya's office. He was a middle-aged black man in a uniform polo, carrying a tablet with obvious nervousness. "I deliver all through Bellhaven," he said. "Was coming back from a stop when I saw the commotion. My van has forward and side cameras for insurance." Isaac pulled up the video file. The timestamp showed 2:51 p.m., and the angle captured the side street perfectly. They watched Tessa's black SUV positioned aggressively close to Malcolm, who stood calmly near the curb with his folder. "There," Isaac said, pointing. "Watch this." On screen, Malcolm clearly stepped aside, moving toward the grass. For 3 full seconds, he stood well clear of the vehicle. Then Tessa's SUV lurched forward, striking Malcolm and sending him stumbling against the curb. But the most damning part came next. The camera captured Tessa immediately jumping out and pointing at Malcolm while shouting. Even without audio, her gestures were obviously accusatory and aggressive. "I couldn't believe what I was seeing," Isaac said. "Lady hits a man with her car, then acts like he attacked her." Elena stared at the screen. "Isaac, why didn't you come forward Saturday?" "Honestly? I was scared. Rich neighborhood, expensive cars, police already there treating her like she was the victim. Figured nobody would believe a delivery driver over someone like that." Priya rewound the footage. This shows the entire sequence. Malcolm stepping away, the deliberate acceleration, the impact, and Tessa's immediate false narrative. Malcolm remained quiet, letting the evidence speak. Carmen covered her face with her hands, finally seeing the full scope of what had happened. Elena watched the footage again, her journalist instincts connecting every piece. The audio proving Tessa's threats, and Malcolm's restraint. The photos proving his legitimate presence. The call logs proving the conspiracy. And now video proving both the assault and the immediate cover-up attempt. She looked up at Malcolm with something approaching awe. Elena watched Isaac's footage, stunned, and said, "This doesn't just prove the hit, it proves the cover-up." Darius Vale's mahogany desk had never felt smaller. The afternoon sun slanted through his downtown office windows, highlighting the sweat gathering at his hairline as he read Elena Marquez's latest email. "Mr. Vale, I'm fact-checking several claims for publication Thursday. Can you confirm whether your client, Mrs. Kingsley, instructed deletion of Bellhaven security footage from Saturday, March 18th? Do you have documentation of communications with realtor Carmen Bell regarding buyer Malcolm Reddick? What is your response to allegations that HOA enforcement actions target specific demographic groups?" Each question hit like a sledgehammer. Darius had handled dozens of rich clients and their messy scandals. He knew how to bury problems, silence witnesses, and make uncomfortable truths disappear. But Elena's questions weren't fishing expeditions. They were surgical strikes based on solid information. His phone buzzed. Another email from a different reporter, then another from a legal blog. The story was spreading beyond local news. Darius grabbed his car keys and drove straight to Bellhaven Estates. Tessa answered her front door in yoga clothes and diamond earrings, looking annoyed at the interruption. "Darius, what are you doing here? We need to talk. Now." She led him through her marble foyer into a sitting room decorated with expensive art and fresh orchids. Everything about the space screamed money and control. "Elena Marquez is asking very specific questions," Darius said without sitting down. "Did you order the security footage deleted?" Tessa waved dismissively. "I told the supervisor to handle the situation. That's what we pay them for." "That's obstruction of evidence, Tessa. Did you pressure Theo Larkin to destroy his doorbell footage?" "I reminded him where his loyalty should be. He lives in Bellhaven because we allow it." Darius felt ice form in his stomach. "Please tell me you didn't threaten a witness in writing." "Oh, please. You've fixed worse problems than this." Tessa poured herself sparkling water from a crystal pitcher. "My family made your career, Darius. One phone call from my father got you that partnership. Another call can take it away. This isn't about careers anymore. This is about federal obstruction charges, false police reports, witness intimidation." Darius's voice rose despite himself. "Do you understand what you've dragged me into?" Tessa's eyes hardened. "I understand that you're my attorney, and you'll handle it, like you always do." "Not this time." Darius stood up. "This man isn't going away. The evidence isn't disappearing, and I'm not going to prison because you couldn't control your temper." "You don't get to abandon me, Darius. You're in this as deep as I am." But Darius was already walking toward the door. "No, Tessa, you're in this alone." That evening, Darius sat in his home office staring at his computer screen. His hands shook as he opened his secure files and began copying messages, emails, and call records. Text chains with Tessa demanding he shut down Carmen Bell. Instructions to pressure Theo into silence. Emails coordinating with Grant Pell about keeping local police cooperative. Every communication was a nail in Tessa's coffin, and potentially in his own. But staying loyal to Tessa meant certain destruction. Cooperating with the prosecution meant possible survival. At 9:47 p.m., he dialed Priya Sloane's office number. Ms. Sloane, this is Darius Vale. I believe we need to discuss a mutually beneficial arrangement. 20 minutes later, Priya called Malcolm and said, "The wall just cracked from the inside." Wednesday morning light filtered through the kitchen blinds as Malcolm and Nia sat at their small table, sharing coffee and silence. Malcolm's laptop screen showed Elena's article, scheduled to publish at 8 a.m. The clock read 7:58. "Are you scared?" Nia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Malcolm reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I'm ready." At exactly 8 a.m., Elena's story went live. Federal judge struck by SUV in alleged hate incident. Exclusive investigation reveals pattern of discrimination in elite gated community. Malcolm read aloud as Nia leaned against his shoulder. The article laid out everything in devastating detail. The timeline from the gatehouse to the collision. Audio from Malcolm's dashcam capturing Tessa's threats and the impact sound. Isaac Boone's van footage showing the deliberate strike. Carmen's confirmation that Malcolm was a legitimate buyer. Darius's leaked messages revealing the cover-up conspiracy. But Elena hadn't stopped there. She had found 3 other families pushed out of Belhaven purchases through HOA intimidation, false complaints, and mysterious technical problems with security footage. The Johnsons in 2019, the Martinez family in 2021, the Williams couple just last year, all professional, qualified buyers, all turned away after Tessa decided they didn't fit Belhaven's community standards. "Oh my God," Nia whispered as she read Darius's text messages. She told him to eliminate the problem permanently. Malcolm's phone started buzzing. First one call, then another, then a steady stream. Local news stations, national outlets, his judicial clerk asking if he needed security. By 9 a.m., the story had exploded across social media. Belhaven scandal was trending locally. News vans were setting up outside Belhaven's gates. Malcolm watched his phone light up with notifications. A text from Priya. "Officer Hollis placed on administrative leave. Body cam audio contradicts his report completely." Another from Elena. "Grant Pell just canceled his press event. Reporters surrounded City Hall." Then Carmen called, breathless with excitement. "Malcolm, you need to see the news. They're showing Isaac's footage on every channel. The whole city knows what really happened." Nia pulled up the local news feed on her phone. The anchor was speaking over Isaac's van camera footage, which showed Tessa's black SUV lurching forward into Malcolm with unmistakable deliberation. This exclusive footage, obtained by investigative reporter Elena Marquez, clearly shows the assault was intentional, the anchor said. The victim, federal judge Malcolm Reddick, had stepped away from the vehicle when HOA President Tessa Kingsley accelerated toward him. Malcolm felt something he hadn't experienced in days. Relief? Not satisfaction, not revenge, just the simple relief of truth being heard. At 10:15 a.m., Priya called with the news they'd been waiting for. Warrants have been issued. Assault with a vehicle, filing a false police report, obstruction of justice, and witness intimidation. They're moving now. Malcolm and Nia drove to Belhaven Estates, not to confront anyone, but to witness justice. They parked across from the gatehouse and watched police cars stream through the entrance. On Magnolia Crest, the same street where Malcolm had been struck and humiliated, neighbors emerged from their perfect homes. But this time, they weren't watching Malcolm with suspicion. They were recording Tessa's downfall with their phones. Tessa tried to leave in her black SUV, the same vehicle that had struck Malcolm, but police cars blocked her driveway. Officers approached with warrants as news cameras rolled. "This is insane!" Tessa shouted, as they placed her in handcuffs beside her SUV. "I own this neighborhood. You can't do this to me." But they could, and they did. The cameras captured everything. Thursday morning brought a different kind of tension. Malcolm walked up the courthouse steps with Priya beside him, dressed in his best suit, but carrying himself as a victim, not a judge. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd climbed these same steps hundreds of times to dispense justice. Today, he climbed them seeking it. Nia waited in Carmen's car across the street, watching through the windshield. She'd wanted to come inside, but Malcolm insisted she stay safe from the media circus. "Ready?" Priya asked as they approached the entrance. Malcolm nodded. "Let's see if the system works when it's supposed to." The courtroom was packed. Reporters filled the back rows. Tessa sat at the defendant's table in an expensive navy suit, her chin raised in defiance. She kept glancing at the gallery as if expecting her usual supporters to materialize. They didn't. Judge Patricia Morrison called the case. Malcolm had appeared before her many times as a colleague. Today, she looked at him with professional sympathy and addressed him as Mr. Reddick. The prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Sarah Kim, stood and read the charges in a clear, steady voice that filled the silent courtroom. The defendant is charged with reckless assault with a motor vehicle, a felony, filing a false police report, a misdemeanor, obstruction of justice through evidence tampering, a felony, and witness intimidation, also a felony. Tessa's attorney, a nervous-looking man Malcolm didn't recognize, whispered urgently in her ear. She shook her head angrily. "Your Honor," Kim continued, "the defendant deliberately struck the victim with her vehicle after ordering him to leave a public street. When confronted with evidence, she orchestrated a conspiracy to delete security footage and intimidate witnesses. The state requests she be held without bail." "That's ridiculous," Tessa snapped, half rising from her chair. Her attorney pulled her back down. Judge Morrison's voice cut through the courtroom like ice. "Ms. Kingsley, you will not speak unless I address you directly." The bail hearing proceeded with clinical efficiency. Kim presented Isaac Boone's van footage, Malcolm's dash-cam audio, and excerpts from Darius's leaked messages. Each piece of evidence landed like a hammer blow. Tessa's attorney argued for minimal bail, claiming she was a respected community leader with deep local ties. But when Kim mentioned the deleted security footage and Theo Larkin's intimidation, Judge Morrison's expression hardened. "Bail is set at $50,000, Morrison announced. "The defendant will surrender her passport immediately. She is prohibited from contacting any witnesses, entering Belhaven Estates, except to access her residence, and using social media to discuss this case." Tessa's face went white. She'd expected her money and connections to smooth this over. Instead, she was being treated like any other defendant. As court adjourned, Malcolm noticed Darius Vale entering through a side door with his own attorney. The former fixer looked pale and defeated. His cooperation deal was already in motion. Outside, reporters swarmed toward Malcolm and Priya. Cameras flashed as microphones thrust forward. "Judge Reddick, how does it feel to see your attacker charged? What message does this send to other communities?" Malcolm stopped on the courthouse steps. Nia could see him through the car window, standing straight and dignified despite everything he'd endured. "I have a brief statement," Malcolm said, his voice carrying clearly across the crowd. "No neighborhood in this country belongs to fear, money, or lies. Justice doesn't care about your address or your bank account. It cares about truth." He paused, looking directly into the cameras. "What happened to me could happen to any family seeking a home. Today proved that when good people stand up, bullies fall down." That was it. No anger, no satisfaction, just simple truth delivered with quiet authority. From the car, Nia felt something she hadn't experienced in days: pride. Her father hadn't just survived Tessa's attack. He'd turned his pain into a lesson for everyone watching. Carmen's phone buzzed as they drove away from the courthouse. She answered, listened for a moment, then broke into a wide smile. "Malcolm," she said, turning in the passenger seat. That was the seller of 18 Magnolia Crest. 2 weeks later, the morning sun cast long shadows across 18 Magnolia Crest as the moving truck rumbled through Belhaven's gates. Malcolm stood on the front porch, holding a thick manila folder containing the signed closing papers, court orders dissolving the HOA board, and a letter from the Federal Judicial Ethics Committee clearing him of all complaints. The house was theirs. Nia emerged from the truck's cab, stretching after the short drive from their old townhouse. She looked up at the white stone facade, the arched windows, and the wide front yard where her father had been struck just 3 weeks ago. "It feels different now," she said quietly. Malcolm nodded. The street looked the same. Perfectly manicured lawns, elegant homes, expensive cars in circular driveways. But the atmosphere had changed completely. No more suspicious stares from windows, no more whispered conversations behind garden gates. The fear Tessa had wielded like a weapon was gone. "Judge Reddick?" The moving foreman approached with a clipboard. "We're ready to start unloading. Should we put the boxes marked Nia's room upstairs in the front bedroom?" "The one with the bay window," Nia confirmed, pointing toward the second floor. She'd fallen in love with that room during their second peaceful tour of the house. As furniture and boxes flowed from the truck, neighbors began appearing on their porches and sidewalks. But this time, they weren't watching with hostility or suspicion. Several waved. Mrs. Patterson from across the street brought over fresh cookies. An elderly man named Robert Chen introduced himself and offered to help carry boxes. "We're glad you're here," Mrs. Patterson said simply. "This neighborhood needed families like yours." The transformation wasn't just social. Court-ordered changes had swept through Belhaven like a cleansing storm. The HOA board had been dissolved pending restructuring under judicial oversight. The discriminatory enforcement rules Tessa's family had crafted were suspended. A federal consent decree required transparency in all future HOA decisions. Most satisfying of all, Carmen had contacted Malcolm with news that 3 families previously rejected by Belhaven's unofficial screening process were being invited to reopen purchase negotiations. The Gonzalez family, blocked from buying 2 years ago when their contractor business was deemed incompatible with community standards. The Williams family mysteriously outbid after Tessa decided they weren't the right fit. The Nakamura family, whose perfectly legitimate offer had somehow gotten lost in HOA paperwork. All of them were coming back. The consequences for Tessa's enablers had been swift and visible. Officer Hollis remained on administrative leave while Internal Affairs investigated his falsified report. City Councilman Grant Pell watched his donor base evaporate as businesses distanced themselves from Belhaven's scandal. Darius Vale faced professional discipline hearings despite his cooperation, his partnership dissolved, and his reputation in ruins. As for Tessa herself, her mansion sat dark and empty at the end of the street. Legal notices plastered across her gate announced asset seizure proceedings. Reporters still occasionally gathered outside, hoping for a statement, but she'd vanished into her lawyer's offices and avoided all public appearances. By afternoon, the major furniture was placed, and Nia was unpacking books in her new room. Malcolm found himself standing in the kitchen, looking out the window at the backyard where he planned to build a small garden. "Dad?" Nia's voice called from upstairs. "Someone's here to see you." Malcolm walked to the front door and found Carmen waiting with a woman he didn't recognize. Middle-aged, professional, carrying a briefcase. "Malcolm, this is Sandra Martinez from the court-appointed HOA Oversight Committee," Carmen explained. "She wanted to meet with you about tomorrow night's community meeting." Sandra shook his hand warmly. "Judge Reddick, the court has ordered a full community meeting to discuss the new HOA structure. We'd like you and Nia to address the residents, if you're willing. Your voice carries weight now." Malcolm glanced toward the staircase where Nia was listening from the landing. She met his eyes and nodded firmly. "We'll be there," he said. The next evening, Belhaven's community center filled with residents who hadn't spoken to each other in years. The old system of whispered judgments and careful social positioning was crumbling. In its place, something resembling actual community was emerging. When Sandra introduced Malcolm and Nia, the applause was genuine and sustained. Malcolm spoke briefly about fairness and transparency. Then he stepped aside for his daughter. Nia approached the microphone with the poise of someone who had learned hard lessons about courage. She looked out over the crowd, Some faces familiar from that terrible Saturday, others completely new. 3 weeks ago, she began, her voice clear and strong. A woman in this neighborhood told my father to get out. She said this place belonged to her. She was wrong. The room was completely silent. Belonging isn't a gift bullies get to grant, Nia continued. It's a right decent people defend. My father and I belong here not because we proved ourselves to anyone, but because we're human beings who treat others with respect. She paused, scanning the audience. Some of you watched that day and said nothing. I understand why. Fear is powerful, but so is truth. And truth won. The applause began slowly, then built into something thunderous and healing. Later that evening, as the last boxes were unpacked and Nia was settling into her homework routine, Malcolm carried a small magnolia sapling from the garage to the front yard. The tree was barely 3 feet tall, its roots wrapped carefully in burlap. Nia joined him on the lawn as twilight painted the street in soft purple hues. Together, they dug a hole near the corner of the yard, where the morning sun would reach the young tree's leaves. Mom would have loved this house, Nia said quietly as she helped lower the sapling into the earth. She would have loved seeing you speak tonight, Malcolm replied. She always said courage was contagious. They pressed rich, dark soil around the magnolia's roots, their hands working together in the fading light. The tree looked small and vulnerable now, but Malcolm knew it would grow strong here. Its white blooms would eventually fill this yard with beauty and hope. As they finished planting, Malcolm noticed movement across the street. A young couple with 2 small children was touring the house that had been empty for months. The realtor led them around the front yard, pointing out features and answering questions. The children ran ahead, laughing and exploring. The family looked relaxed, happy, unafraid. For the first time since his wife's death, Malcolm felt something he'd almost forgotten, the simple peace of being exactly where he belonged. He and Nia stood together in their front yard, their hands still dirty from planting, watching their neighborhood transform from a fortress of fear into something that looked like home. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel, and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.